Hey there, and welcome to As the World Works. I have a very, very special guest today, and I say that often, but this one in particular is not only close to me, but close to my heart, close to my family. Um, he's also my first cousin, Dr. Beau Nelson. He's the Director of Clinical Services at the Florida House Experience, FHA, which is a health institution specializing in behavioral health, addiction disorders, mood disorders, things like that. And it's just an honor to have you here today, Beau, because mental health is an important thing. And with your experience, expertise, I know you've had a practice in cognitive behavioral therapy using the REBT method and things like that. But so, without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Beau Nelson.
Great. Hi, Sam. Good to be here.
Good to have you. Did I get everything in there?
Yes, it's hard to keep track of everything, but that was
Uh,
good.
so, tell us. Obviously, I know you. I've known you all my life,
Right.
uh, but I've also seen the development of your career over the last 20 plus years. And so, where did it all begin?
Well, I've been practicing therapy for 20 years, and I have a route that is always kind of circuitous in life. We think we know what we want to do, and we think we know where we need to be, and divine intervention kind of steps in and tells us where we need to be. And so I had originally sought to go into ministry and was in seminary to be an ordained minister. And as I was looking at what I like to do, I enjoyed pastoral counseling. And so that led me actually to get a master's degree in social work. And I started off as a therapist after that. And then I worked in medical and psychology practice for many years. And I decided to get my doctorate. I have a doctorate in behavioral health, and which is really the integration of psychology into primary care medicine. And so it's been an interesting road over the years, one that I'm very grateful for and appreciate. But it has been, obviously, as times change, a lot of learning and growth for me too. And so probably never really expected to be where I am now as when I first started this career, but very grateful for everything I have.
And you had the opportunity to work with and study under some really amazing people like Albert Ellis, the
Yeah,
founder of cognitive behavioral therapy in
yes.
New York, right?
Yeah, Dr. Ellis was the grandfather of cognitive behavioral therapy, one of really the most effective treatments that we have in psychology. And I was able to do training that he led and through the Institute in New York. And it really has been a real important part for my own personal development as well as my professional practice.
One of the things that I found humorous in one of the bios I read on you a while back was something like, my job is to work my way out of work or something like that so that I can
Yeah.
give you the tools never to come back.
Right. Well, I always tell people, Dr. Ellis, the Institute had says short-term therapy, long-term results,
Mm.
and so a lot of folks when they've come to me, it's kind of really like a little bit of a last resort. They've tried the medications, they've tried all kinds of different therapies, and I always tell them, I said, what I'm going to give you is an opportunity in a very short time with the skills and the tools, more like a coach, more than kind of like what we think of as therapy. And then they're going to go out and practice it and start teaching it to their friends because it becomes a part of us, and they get better. And
What's
hopefully,
what's the yeah? Well, what's yeah? So you've lost all your clients.
Mhm.
So what happens when they come in? I think you've told me this before, and You do most of the talking, right?
At the
Because
beginning, right? Yeah, it's more like really teaching people what's going on and where the problems lie. And so once we get an idea of kind of what their goals are, I find that it's, not really as helpful to just go over the stories and all the hurts and all the problems. I mean, certainly any of us can face those, but where our mind rests, there our emotions are going to be. And so if we live in the moments that were hardest or most difficult in our life, then it's not unusual for our mood then to kind of follow along. And
mm,
so a big part of it is learning and cognitive behavioral therapy, the method and the tools, being able to practice those and be able to get us into a better space.
so when people think there's something wrong with them, typically, right? They
Uh,
walk in and say, "Fix me." There's something wrong. How do you respond to that?
Most people think they need to become someone else in order to be happy.
Ah,
And so, for a lot of us, and we are human beings, we've had the same problems for thousands of years. Psychology came up very late in this process, but people learn how to cope and deal with things. And as we kind of go through a process, we learn what we need, what we don't need. And I think it's really important for us to be open for the situations and the learning processes and the growth that we can have, but we don't have to become a new person. We really need sometimes to find just new ways of doing things. I often say to people, it's kind of like if, in third grade, it was picture day and you had your favorite little sweater and, oh, you looked so good in this sweater and you felt so great and the picture was adorable. Your mother was like, oh, you're just an angel. Well, that worked in third grade, but you wouldn't want to try to put the same sweater on now. You're not going to get the same feeling. And so for a lot of us, we have patterns and behaviors, things that maybe worked at one time, but don't still work now. And we have to update and find new ways to deal with that. And one of the things that I often find is that we often give everyone else better advice than we take ourselves. So we don't tell ourselves kind of what we think is best. Being a parent and having kids, isn't it interesting the advice you give your kids, but did you really live that way when you were a teenager?
100% not. You told me that, yeah, one of the things you shared, golden pieces of or nuggets of information and wisdom, is what advice would you give your best friend, and
Right.
give that to yourself, right?
Right. Yeah. Sometimes changing your perspective in the moment is really important. And a lot of people feel like, well, I can't handle this, or I don't know what's going on, or I don't know what to say. But if it's someone who you loved and cared about, you probably could give them something that would be more useful than maybe some of the things we would practice just to escape our feelings or feel better in the moment.
And the secondary emotion is sometimes worse than the primary emotion, right?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of people are disturbed by their disturbed emotions. So if someone is anxious and scared, and it's kind of like, a parent screaming at their child, stop being anxious and scared. You're bad for being anxious and scared. And you go, well, I'm anxious and scared. This really isn't helping very much. And it's funny how often we do that. I should be smarter. I should be able to handle this. I should do all these different things. And again, it's like you're just a human being and you create more problems by avoiding the real need that you have and responding to it in a compassionate and caring and effective way.
And so how do you, in the middle of distressing situations, or even the world that we live in today, right, that is full of uncertainty, and certainly there is a palpable stress or fear, I guess, that's out there or in here or kind of around the world. And so what is fear?
Well, again, fear is often the unknown or uncertainty. Again, something bad is going to happen. And if we believe that, if I say to you, on the other side of that door is a killer, well, you would probably sit in your chair and stare at that door, and you could get all of these things in your mind. Then I just tell you and say, oh, I'm just kidding. There's no killer outside the door. Then you're like, oh, it's fine. Then you just open the door and walk out. So again, fear can be real or imagined. So a lot of times we think, situation is going to be this way or that way. We tell ourselves what we can handle or what we can't handle. We tell ourselves something's life or death. Our language is very important. There's in linguistics, the study of general semantics. And Dr. Ellis had pointed this out, that word choices are very important. When your kid comes to you and said, when's lunch? I'm starving. And you go, really? You're starving? You're starving. You ate 3 hours ago. You're starving. But it really does. It's like when you create this catastrophic sense of thinking that whatever situation I am is worse than it is, of course, the fear is going to raise. And that fear over time becomes stress and anxiety. And chronic stress and anxiety starts to then affect our bodies and our minds and our relationships and our coping skills. Of just really can change our lives.
So stress is a big factor. Even with COVID now, they're saying less stress, more rest, get your immune system fighting at its peak. And so there is a lot of sort of paralyzation out there, paralyzing.
Yeah, there are a lot of parallels. This is a particular time for a lot of people who have never, of course, in our lifetimes, had to face something like this. There's a lot of unrest, uncertainty. It's just life-changing. And when that happens, people try to find a center, something they can believe in, or something that makes them feel safe. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of things right now that can do that for folks. We don't know a lot about the virus. We don't really know. Again, there's a lot of social unrest, and there's no easy answers. And the changes to our families and our work lives, death. A lot of folks are facing some huge challenges. And so it really does become a process of kind of handling small things and handling bigger things. And, there's a lot right now that I try to tell people, which are some helpful things to be able to deal with the trying times we're in. The first thing I tell people is stop watching so much news. When you think about anxiety or stress, you want to think about the circle that you have control over. There's a huge world out there beyond that circle, but there's not much you're going to be able to do about it. And so for most people, it's really going to be more beneficial to kind of cut down on the news and all the terrible things are happening, and then take care of what you can control. The idea of hand washing, the masks, being careful of social distancing, being mindful of where you go, just thinking through things really makes a difference. But even on the same turn, it's one of those, you can't prevent everything from happening. So you have to accept that there is a risk that's out there, and you can't be 100% safe, but you can mitigate those things. And so, good practices when you're going out is very important, but taking care of your body is important too. Exercise, getting regular sleep, how you eat, reducing the alcohol, drug use, whatever might be the bad stuff, that's in your life that maybe doesn't help. And then really trying to keep a routine going for yourself, even in the midst of everything changing, because human beings like routine, makes us feel safe. And so getting into a regular routine, no matter how your life has changed, can often really help to reduce stress overall.
Sometimes, often, you're published, and you also get requests to be keynote speaker, to give lectures. Recently, and anybody wants to watch something really good beyond this, if we don't cover everything, is a YouTube channel that Beau has, Dr. Beau Nelson.
Oh, I don't have my own channel.
But one of the things you talked about, and we've talked about, is this idea of motivation, action. So which comes first? And you mentioned the antidote of going to the gym. Would you share that with us?
Yeah, sure. Well, the idea is for most people is they feel like they need to motivate themselves before action happens. And so with most people get stuck in kind of a mental trap, which is, I'm overweight. Let's just take that as a particular problem. And I really want to do something about this. So they sit around and they beat themselves up, and I look terrible and I do all this, but then they tend to eat for comfort. So then they keep eating, but they're not really getting up off the couch. They're just thinking about it. And then they'll tell people, oh, I've been trying to lose weight. I've been trying to lose weight. But during, of course, the whole process, they're just keep continuously eating, and gaining weight.
Right.
And so the idea is it comes down to action. For a lot of us, we end up getting lost in our minds. Our minds have a way of kind of thinking, if we're stuck in this process of thinking about something, it almost feels like we're doing something. And unfortunately, that fuels anxiety and stress because we try to plan out everything, put everything together. The fact of the matter is you just need to get up, put shoes on, and go for a walk. Now, again, you're not going to lose all the weight in 15 minutes, but the idea is to just go out and do something. And the more that we go out and do something, and then we get the positive feelings from that, it helps to reinforce that. And so a lot of times, I'll tell patients, they'll say, if you'd like to go to the gym, that would be part of our kind of goal. And they've set that for themselves, but they just can't get themselves to go. So what I tell them to do is I say, well, what I need you to do is put on your workout clothes, get up off the couch, and I want you to go drive to the gym. If your gym's open, of course, given COVID, if your gym's open, go. And I just want you to go stand outside the door of the gym. Don't go in for 5 minutes. Once the 5 minutes is over, then get back in your car. That's your assignment. That's kind of what you do. And so most people look at me like, oh, that's really odd. And so usually they'll come back and they'll say next week, oh, yeah, I did it. And I said, okay, great. How did it go? And they said, well, I went inside. And I said, oh, okay, well, you didn't do your assignment the way we talked about it, but hey, that's great. What'd you do? Well, I got on the bike for 15 minutes. Oh, okay, well, that's good. Well, this week, I'd like you to go to the gym, and I'd like you to get on the bike for 10 minutes. And then after 10 minutes, come back, go home. And so they'll say, oh, okay, again, how's this helping? And so they'll go and they'll say, oh, I went to the gym and I got on the bike, but I actually did it for 30 minutes. And I'll say, well, you didn't do the assignment that we talked about, but hey, that's still great. Okay, and then again, all of a sudden we find that they're actually going and doing more than they would have actually been asked to do, but they feel like they're doing something. And once you start doing something and you start to get into it and it's not so big and it's not so difficult and the hurdles are gone, people can start to see some change. And so again, sometimes we jokingly can kind of fool ourselves into doing something or pushing ourselves sometimes to do something that we otherwise would just sit around and think about.
And we get lost in our brains, like you said, they're tricky things. I want to get to the neuroscience part of FHA. And a second, I know FHE. I'm sorry, yes. The Florida House Experience.
Right. Well, it used to be Florida House Experience. Now we're FHE.
FHE. Because I'm interested to see, how things evolve and new technologies and things like that you're involved with. But there is a big world of, you talked about this small circle and then there's this big world, right? And one time you mentioned that the Western culture, has the benefit of depression and anxiety that other third world countries don't have, or the advantage to be depressed and anxious. I'm not talking about clinically chronic things like that. I'm talking about the majority of people with sort of general.
Right. What we do, the idea of treatment for mental health conditions is really very different across the world. I mean, it's interesting to look at cultural things. Some cultures it's shamanism or or religion really speaks to mental health. For some folks, there's the herbal remedies and the different pieces that they have there. In the Western world, again, we now have medications and we have psychotherapy and these kinds of things. But again, it's we have very bad access in this country to mental health services. So it tends to be, a pretty specialized field from the standpoint that not everybody has access. And so a lot of people really get undiagnosed and untreated throughout the world with these kinds of mood conditions, but they really have to get through them. And it's unfortunate. Just what we see in our culture and what we see in research that's done in different countries is that a lot of people really don't have access to services. And so it's unfortunate that we can't use some of the new knowledge that we have, how the brain works, the different medications that really are effective for people, the kinds of therapies that are effective. They're just not available everywhere, even like rural communities in the US. They don't have access to a psychiatrist or they don't have access to counseling. So we're finding that in COVID, the government actually eased some of the restrictions on telehealth. And so a lot of people might be for the first time doing a telehealth visit with their primary care doctor or maybe with their therapist. And that's really, sounds like, completely different. But that's part of what we needed, is to be able to make sure that people who want help can get it.
Because it had a stigma, I think, before, right? Like,
Yeah,
what is mental health? That's I don't want to diagnose. I don't want to label, right? Oh, you are XYZ.
Yeah, there's a huge stigma against mental health, and we've seen a lot of celebrities now coming out and really making a stand, and that's wonderful. And when people start talking about mental health, we don't feel like we're bad or there's a problem for us or something like this. It really becomes that this is part of the human condition. And that's one of the things I think we're seeing in the pandemic is that for some of the research studies show that people who've had anxiety in the past or being treated for anxiety disorders actually are doing better than we would have thought, because now everybody's anxious. So there's a little bit more that we can kind of all talk about it rather than feeling like the odd bird, and you're just anxious for nothing. So every situation changes it. Each family has been, they're facing all kinds of different things out there. Maybe if we open this dialogue, it really makes a difference for people. And so hopefully, I've done some work with first responders, nurses, therapists, all kinds of folks throughout different jobs and throughout the country. And it's really great to be talking about self-care, how to get through tough times, asking for help when you need it, getting resources that you need. That's really important.
And so let's talk about the Florida House experience and what is the director of clinical services.
Okay. Well, I actually run the programs and the therapists. So we rebranded from Florida House Experience to FHE Health because we have an integrated behavioral health model. So we really take care of the medical side in addition to what treatment might provide, which most people think of, talk therapy. And so I oversee the staff and the different programs. And it's really, in this kind of time periods, again, seeing how people have access to services. The big thing that we're seeing right now are really people's what we call maladaptive coping skills. So like alcohol use and drug use. We have seen in 2019, we showed a huge increase in the number of overdose deaths. There were 72,000 overdose deaths from opioids. And you start to see, we've seen people with alcohol, domestic violence, child abuse. I mean, the pandemic has really created this situation, and a lot of people are falling some really bad coping skills. And so we offer those services to help people get their lives back on track. And it's really needed right now.
Well, that's from the bottom of my heart, great work you're doing. And working at a facility like that has got to be a big change from having your own private practice.
It is. It's interesting. A few years ago, I kind of semi-retired, and I learned that that was not what I wanted to do. And I know that I love being busy, and I love helping people. And it's been, again, like I said before, the journey in my career has been really a surprise to me, but something I'm so grateful for. And the neat thing is that there's an old saying which says a lesson is repeated until it is learned. And
Oh, so
yeah,
true.
and it's like, I think about sometimes when I was like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And it ended up being, no, this is really what you need to do. And the doors have opened, and it has really been gratifying over my career.
And you just said something interesting, that there is an appropriate use of the word need and should and things in perspective when
Right.
they're serving you, right?
Right.
When they're not downing you,
Right.
self-down. And so how do you counter that? I think this would be something useful. It has been to me. If you could
Mhm.
offer a suggestion on countering what he would, Dr. Ellis would call quit shooting on yourself, or
Mhm.
masturbation, all the
Mhm.
musts in your life, things like that. How do you quickly counter that? Or do you
Yeah,
just
well,
sit with it and watch it go by?
the idea is that, a lot of times is what we're doing is we create our own suffering through the ways that we approach the world. And if we think I must be a success, or I must be gorgeous, or I should be a better parent, or I should be a better child, whatever it is, again, we keep looking at ourselves as not being good or not being right. And then we've got to, again, make ourselves into something that is. And the fact is there's a lot of missing acceptance of kind of who we are. And so big part of this is that we have to have realistic expectations. I think this is one thing, like during this time, we talk about traumatic stress. You have a reaction to this situation like the pandemic. Again, human beings have reactions. You're not always going to be cool, calm, and collected. You're not always going to get everything that you want in life. You're not going to always get people to treat you exactly the way you want. So you have to learn a measure of acceptance. And part of it sometimes is kind of stepping back a little bit and changing the way that you process that moment. Is this really that big a deal? Again, things happen, and some of the most wonderful things that ever happen to us are because we have no control over them. It's a lot of times when we try to say, I have to have this, that's not exactly what we need. It's just what we want. And again, much like a child, if you just give a child what they want, what do they grow up to be? So a lot of times we have to be able to say no to ourselves and be able to look at longer term goals. But that all comes from our thinking, how we're processing in that moment, how we're looking at that situation. And again, what would you tell somebody else in that situation?
And I think I don't think we have a very deep vocabulary and feelings on the feeling spectrum, right? How's it
Mm-hmm.
going, Sam? Good.
Right.
Okay. I mean, when you talk about, well, how are you feeling? Sit with that feeling, and it's trying to maybe tell you something, and then and you have this uncomfortable feeling. People don't like discomfort, so they want distraction, diving into it, sitting with it, suffering more. So, do you think an enhanced, other cultures have 10 different, you know, meanings of the word happy,
Mm-hmm.
different nuances of what joy is. And so we have maybe a handful of terms of
Mm-hmm.
things we identify with. And if it's outside of that, I got to Google it and figure out what's wrong with me, right?
Right. Yeah,
Is that the second thing you tell your clients is number
yeah.
one, don't watch TV, and number two, don't Google things when you feel
Well, yes, definitely. Too much information can create far more anxiety than anything else. I think as we look at things, it really is. It's important that we get past kind of the initial feeling that we sometimes label, that we are complex individuals. And so there's not just one thing. And so like right now, a lot of people are looking at, oh, I'm scared or I'm stressed. Okay, that's true, but there's probably something else that's there too. And a lot of people are, as you mentioned, discomfort, but, you know, depressed and angry, grieving. There's all kinds of different things that are going on there. It tends to be, you know, we're a little just too simplistic sometimes with
Because those things are normal, right? I mean,
yeah. Again, I would be more worried if somebody wasn't anxious. You know, they say, you know, I lost my job. I don't know if my kids are going back to school. You know, I might have been exposed to the virus. Well, I would hope that you could be able to have a very healthy negative emotion in that moment, or a shock or disbelief. It's not weird. And having a level of anxiety or stress is not always a negative. Sometimes it does push us a little bit to get through something. It tells us to plan or be more mindful. You know, I think, you know, people, we talk about touching your face. You know, people don't realize now all of a sudden people are like, oh my gosh, I touch my face all the time. You know, they're like, I never really noticed.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's interesting how it can really create a heightened awareness. But again, not to frighten us, but just to be aware of what's going on. It kind of turns off the autopilot that we sometimes had in life. And I think a big thing for this is it also makes us appreciate the things that we do have. That we got caught up in, you know, our culture, you know, it's everybody's thinking, you know, going out to restaurants and parties and, you know, the mall and all that was the most important thing in life. And the fact is, once you kind of take that away, a lot of people can start to reevaluate a little bit and go, well, my family, my health, you know, they had just did a report that I saw in the United Kingdom. 1 million people have stopped smoking in the United Kingdom. And so you start to look at it and go, I have a lot of people who I know in my life who dedicated themselves to eating well, getting to bed on time, doing these things so they can keep their immune system up. And it's like, we probably wouldn't have done it if we didn't have this kind of reset.
Molly, stop ordering from Amazon.
Yeah. And some people have just switched. You've gone from the mall to online ordering. That is shock therapy.
Speaking of shock therapy, oh, you said shock therapy.
Yes.
Let's talk about the you know, where you are with the neuroscience department at FHE. And some of the things you're seeing in advances, you know, in our wiring.
Right. Well, again, human beings are complex yet fragile individuals, and so we don't know everything about, you know, how our bodies and our minds work. And you think about in recent history, you know, the idea of kind of this mind, body, spirit kind of approach. The idea that we know, like with in therapy, we use mindfulness, which is an Eastern discipline. A lot of people, yoga, these kinds of things. You know, we just didn't think that, oh, you know, well, that really can make a difference. Yes, it can. Obviously, exercise and healthy eating, but knowing how the brain works and knowing that, you know, in the course of our development, that we can impact how our brain functions, and we can dysregulate that brain. And then we're not as able to cope with life's issues. Example would be a person who chronically drinks. Well, they're going to have problems in the way that their brain operates. Both the impulse control for wanting to rush to a drink, obviously it's going to change the physical aspects of nutrition and what the brain needs, the building blocks. It's going to change the way that your moods interact. So it's not something you can't just say, oh, well, I'm just going to stop drinking. Well, unfortunately, there may have been some negative effects to the way that your brain is processing. It may make it even harder to break into a new pattern. And so we actually look at treating the brain because it's an important part of somebody having a chance to get better. And so what we do is we do neurotherapy, which can be based on what's called operant conditioning, where you basically teach the brain repetitively to do something different. And so if I sat here and tapped my finger 1,000 times, a corresponding part of my brain, because it's a muscle, would grow, and we could see a change in the brain. If I show you different images and I'm monitoring your brain, we can see how your brain is processing through the electrical impulses of the brain. And so we can offer a way that the brain starts to get a new pathway that it can go down. Kind of like if you are going through the woods and you keep going down the same pathway, but I tell you, hey, there's a quicker way to the lodge if you just go over here to the left. Well, the path you've been taking is all nice and worn, and it's the plants are back. But I tell you, this is faster, and so you say, well, that's too overgrown. That doesn't look right. Well, the brain's that way too. And so what we do is we start going the quicker way. And if you keep doing that, eventually that path gets worn, and then the other path doesn't seem so important. Then we also do something called neurostimulation. And neurostimulation is actually much more beneficial in a way because it's quicker, but it actually helps the brain to be able to regenerate, to be able to learn ways to operate. And for a lot of mental health conditions, it can really show some significant improvement for folks. And it gives them a chance to be able to process and to think and to act differently. And sometimes, just the old white knuckling it doesn't work. And so this helps to give people a leg up to be able to do something different.
Also, Beau, you don't mind if I call you Beau, do you, Dr. Nelson?
Well, you have for some 20, you're older than me. So when I was just a baby, I think you called me.
I can't even remember what I was going to Actually, I was realizing at the moment that you were just talking, I was mindful and then at the same time very present with how shallow my breathing was, right? And I talked to you, it's been years the last time I was stressed out.
Yes.
Probably in the last month or so.
This morning.
And you were in a meeting and I texted you something that was going on and you said, and it was very simple. It was just like breathe in 4 counts, 5. What is the rhythm of that?
Oh yeah, it's so you breathe in through your nose for a count of 5, hold it, and then breathe out through your mouth for a count of 7. When you're breathing in, you want to get it really deep, so it's called diaphragmatic breathing, and you want to really get that deep breath. And basically, what that does is it tells your body that everything's okay. So chemicals that would normally be released when you have shallow breathing, which is kind of like when you're in a fight or flight response, something's going on, then your body releases chemicals so that you're ready to, run away from that bear in the wilderness. But if your body, unfortunately, is starting to produce those chemicals in a situation where you can't physically do anything, then you get a buildup of those, and it affects the way that your body works. The breathing actually tells your body, well, if you're having deep breaths, clearly there's nothing that's serious danger in front of us, and it will help to relax you. And I've had a lot of patients who otherwise have not been able to control their anxiety, and just with some simple breathing techniques and some exercise to help to burn off those chemicals, really see a difference in their stress and anxiety levels.
What about people that have suffered chronic anxiety, agoraphobia, things like that? Just what's the fear of flying? Things like that, where have you seen that quick progression, or not quick, but a progression where people can actually go function in that discomfort and then realize that everything's okay?
Right. Yes, they can. And one of the big things with anxiety is that people are afraid of having anxiety. And so, again, so they tell themselves when they're getting on an airplane that, oh, I'm going to get really anxious and I won't be able to get off the plane and I won't be able to do anything, and then I'm going to feel terrible and it's going to be awful. Of course, then they walk on the plane and it's a foregone conclusion. Oh, and then their mind is racing and, oh, we're going to crash and this is going to be terrible and what, I'm going to get COVID. Whatever thoughts might be running through their mind, and it's, of course, they're working themselves up. The thing about anxiety attacks, when there's an intense moment of anxiety, is if you do absolutely nothing, your body cannot maintain it. So it has to go away. Now, of course, for the person suffering, it feels like it's 2 hours. It may be a minute. But again, the idea is if you sit with it and you really don't do anything, then it goes away. Now, you might restoke it again by scaring yourself and again like that. But again, it's much like if you're in a horror movie. And if you ever been in a movie, you know, and you disassociate, we call it, you actually feel like you're in the movie. You forget you're in the theater. And something scary happens. And then, of course, you have a huge reaction. Don't go in the shower. You know, watch out for the guy. But when you walk out of the movie theater, you're not still anxious because you put it in context of what's going on. And so
Right.
between techniques like the breathing, relaxation techniques, we have a progressive muscle relaxation, we call it, where you actually loosen some of the tightness that you have in your muscles, and then thinking in a way that would be beneficial, then you can find people who basically they get through those episodes. And if they're not afraid of the episodes happening, then they really have less episodes.
So what do you do personally to have fun? And because fun is certainly something I know about you, is that you enjoy life and people and service. But there's a lot of isolation in sort of this world that we're in right now, especially when they were stay safe at home and those orders and they may be coming again, who knows? And so I think fun is underrated. And is happiness underrated, or is contentment underrated?
That's a good question. Happiness for a lot of people is a word. It's so distant and so far away that I don't think they really know what that would even feel like. And, you know, for a lot of us, we don't realize that our bad coping skills, our bad behaviors, our negative emotions really creates a glass ceiling. You know, I think a lot of people would have a hard time saying that they're happy. Or I ask people often, I say, tell me the last time you were very happy. And it doesn't come right off the tongue. Now, if I ask people, say, when was the last time you were really stressed? Or when was the last time you were really angry? Those seem to be easier to remember for people. You know, there's an old saying which says happiness is not a destination, it's the journey. I often give people the example, the metaphor of like, you know, when you go on family trips, you know, and if you can remember your situation, you know, I can always think about back in my childhood, and I can remember my dad wanting to get to the destination and my mother just wanting everyone to get along in the car, you know, and kind of a different way of dealing with it. But you know, happiness or contentment really has less to do with what's going on. The events don't create happiness. It is the experience that's meaningful for us. And I think, you know, again, without all the distractions that we've had in the past, I think this time, the stay-at-home orders or working from home or kids home from school, all of a sudden it really upsets kind of that sense of, you know, well, what is important and what can I enjoy? And I try to help people to see the gratitude that they can have in a situation. Sometimes it's important to be able to step away, but just in our lives, you know, much like parents will often say, you know, how difficult it is when their kids are little, but they will always look back and say those were some of the most special times.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
But it doesn't feel that way when we're in it. And unfortunately, in our world, it's so busy and we've got so many different priorities, we tend to only know when we're happy when we see it in a rearview mirror.
Mm-hmm.
We never really know. Yeah, we never know in that moment that we're happy. And I think that sense of awareness, as you're talking about too, being present in that moment, is really something that I hope people can develop, because it's not keeping yourself busy and doing all these different things. It's finding a sense of peace and satisfaction in yourself that can create that journey where you can enjoy the different steps along rather than just trying to reach something.
You've always been I wouldn't say nomadic, but you can pack up a backpack and be, you know,
Mhm.
you could pack your life up pretty quick and be on to the
Right.
beach, whatever, down the street, you know. And so I've admired that simplistic,
The
not simple,
minimalist.
minimal.
Minimalist.
Yeah, that's the word.
Right.
Um, and so does that help you with your brain function
Yeah.
and because assumedly, um, I don't know if you've had to work at home or
Mhm.
worked at home at some point, and so having that clear environment assumedly helps.
Yeah. The idea is, I think I kind of stumbled upon a kind of Buddhist philosophy. Always says that suffering comes from attachments. And so the more things that we're attached to, of course, it's going to limit us. And so you think about like a balloon, you know, if you have 50 sandbags, that balloon's probably not going anywhere. If you have one, it's probably going to be taking that one with it. The idea in life is just what's important to us. You know, I think again, during this time, there's a little bit of a reset. You know, what's important to us is that, you know, it may not be that purse or the party you're going to or the hairdresser or whatever it might. I think we simplify, and it does take away some of the problems that we have to face, the suffering. We can't take everything away, but in life, we're going to have lots of different things we have to do and experience and responsibilities, but we just don't want to add to that unnecessarily. And I think that we've seen some research, you know, obviously a lot of people before they were coming into the pandemic were not financially in a good place. And people were living paycheck to paycheck, and the credit cards are maxed out and all these things, which is stressful even on a good day. But now all of a sudden, now it becomes even that much more. And so as people start to look at their spending and their situations, a job, maybe they're not making as much or they've been laid off or whatever, it's interesting what's enough when
Mm.
that changes. And all of a sudden it's, you know, having a meal or going to the grocery store is really important, but getting another 60-inch TV for the bedroom isn't as important. And whether it's things or people or experiences, hopefully we can kind of keep those as in our little circle again, and and try to simplify a little bit, because there's just too much going on if we want to have everything.
And we're tribal, right? We're social beings, and
Yeah.
so there's this divide. And one of my premises of the show is not to talk politics or religion; those are off the chart. However, there is this a lot of us and them going on, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and I think it's beyond tribal. I think it's a lot of that's out of fear and uncertainty and everything we've talked about, or identity, or at least some semblance of like, yes, identity with a group or, but I don't know where the other the others come from. You know, if that comes from a, you know, higher, you know, above you or below you, or what does that come from?
Right.
I don't.
It's an interesting, you know, this is the eternal. There's the yin, the yang, the good, the bad. You know, there's always something, and for a lot of us, especially when we're scared, we define ourselves in opposition to something else. And it's much like a parent will say with their teenager, if they tell them to do something, the kid will do just the opposite. You know, again, in any given situation, who's safe, who's not safe. There's a real basic kind of need for safety that we have. And so being able to determine what's right, what's wrong is really important for us for survival skills. Now, that can obviously be taken far beyond what is useful to us. But we define ourselves by what we believe. We define ourselves by the church we go to, the neighborhood we live in, the school that our kids go to. There's all so many different things. Unfortunately, it tends to chop everything up. And when you're in that situation, again, if it's just me or it's my family or whatever, how do we feel safe? And so a lot of times people will kind of categorize, someone else or something, and they'll do that out of a sense of trying to feel safe
Mm.
and kind of hold on to something, find a grounding. We know that for a lot of people, like faith and spirituality can be a real healing process, property for them. It's really great, and we can see that even psychologically and in research that makes a difference. But for some people, it may turn into something where people who aren't a part of their spiritual zone become kind of an enemy. And then, of course, there's so many different pieces to this, but we really want to find and glean from each thing that we have the best we can. And sometimes we have to learn where that boundary is so we can kind of keep ourselves safe, but not necessarily focus on who's bad or who's right or who's wrong, but more what helps us to feel safe.
That sounds fair. Fair enough.
Yeah.
That's reasonable. So, one final question. What one of the things you talk about in your therapy is there's nothing wrong with you. What else do you tell them?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would definitely, you'd have to be paying for me for this spot if I give you everything that's good. But I tell people I'm in the business of giving hope. That's really what I do. And so part of this thing is that nobody is completely bad. Nobody is completely stuck. The idea of finding a space, where you are right now is exactly where you need to be, that you can find a sense of peace in the situation. You can have all kinds of different things going on around you, but you can still find a sense of centeredness in that moment. It doesn't mean everything's going great. It doesn't mean positive thinking and, I'm going to just pretend like nothing exists. But again, it's finding that space to where you trust yourself. You do have the ability to keep yourself safe. And a lot of times, once we start to get the chatter out of our head, which is unhelpful, we're really able to deal with the life events that we're facing a whole lot better, and often without as many bumps and bruises. There's certain things in life that come to us, and then there's a lot of things that we create in ourselves. And I think if you can gain the wisdom to determine the difference between those two, you can put more of your energy towards the life issues and try to quiet the inside stuff that probably isn't helping.
Yeah. Do you, that's huge. Cause I find myself at times, and I'll catch myself watching screen time before I go to bed and having the worst night's sleep because it's in my subconscious, right? For my dream states. And it goes with you. It's like waking up and watching the news in the morning and setting the tone for the day.
Right.
So what are some, you mentioned meditation, prayer, things like that, spiritual, it's different for everybody, right? Whatever it is that at that moment, what are those sort of physical experiences or calming, settling down, not necessarily in the middle of a panic attack, but just kind of to reset yourself, because every day is different. You're different than you were yesterday.
Right. Well, a big thing is connectedness. We talk about social distancing. I really wish we called it physical distancing.
Yeah, right.
We don't want to be socially distant. I mean, the idea is that this really is the time. And, thank goodness for technology. The one thing I've done is I've given so many talks on Zoom now. I'm like an expert on it. Never had done that before this. And I've probably in the past 3 months done about 40 different talks with a variety of audiences. The idea of really connecting to people is important. And so phone calls, text messages, FaceTiming, again, staying with the people who are really supportive and helpful for you. Just knowing that somebody cares, that makes a big difference in our psyche. The idea of routines, again, trying to create a schedule for yourself, making sure that you have in place the things that you need during your day, getting a routine for sleep. Our bodies do best when we go to sleep at the same time and wake up at the same time every day, 7 days a week. Don't change it on the weekends. The body gets into rhythms, and that rhythm becomes something of safety for us because it's normal. A lot of the things that we used to have, maybe like for some people going to church or going to the office in the morning or whatever it might be, those normal routines, going to the gym in the evenings, try to set those same kind of times aside, whether if it's doing something individually or in your family or at your home, but still have those things in place. It's funny, you don't have to go to a gym to exercise, but again, people are like, oh, I can't go to the gym. Well, you can still go for a walk. You can still get on the bike. You can still, do push-ups at home. That's important for you. Same with the spiritual discipline. It's important to pray or to have your time to meditate or to get out in nature or whatever. And it's important to have fun too. One of the biggest things I'm facing with a lot of folks now is because they're working at home, they think they're on 24 hours a day. And they're never shutting off the email. They're never, doing anything except work. And again, that's not healthy. We got to have some downtime, have some enjoyment. All of those things combine together to help us to feel a little bit more stable, normal, and safe.
I got an email this morning from someone that wrote it at 2 a.m. Are we still on for Tuesday?
Yes, I know. And it is. And remember, sometimes work is one of those kind of maladaptive coping skills, workaholism. Yeah. Sometimes we work, so we're just really distracting ourselves. And so sometimes, it may get a little uncomfortable when you have to put that phone away, or turn off your ringer, and all of a sudden, oh, I'm not connected to my phone. I've not got something to do. You may actually see that you're a little bit more anxious than you thought you were.
So where do patterns come from?
Mm-hmm. For many of us, they're learned. We find things that are comfortable for us and that we like. Preferences are normal for human beings. We tend to find things which we call our ego syntonic, or they fit with our ego, who we are as a person. And that's as varied as the number of people that are out there. But usually they serve some sense of a purpose, either emotionally, physically, or environmentally for us. But the idea with patterns is that while they're part of our lives, they are not necessarily permanent. And so, much like when you're a kid, you're used to going between, 8:30 and 4, to school. Well, work doesn't work that way. And so we have to adapt. And the same way as when maybe in your 20s and you go out every day of the week and hang out with your friends at the bar, when you hit 40, if you're still doing that, you're probably going to be looking like a mess. So we all change patterns.
Hungover for a week. I'll let you know when I turn 40. And
well, given my age, I think that was some time ago, knowing our age.
I was 40. I do want to end on a light question though. Mm-hmm. When people ask, it's not even ask, maybe it's a statement. Oh, I don't even know who I am. Told you it was a light question.
That's light, yeah. I don't know in what existential world you live in. That's pretty big.
But that's people that are, midlife or young. I've talked to, I've heard that often. Like, who am I? I don't even know who I am, and exes will tell you that. I don't even know who you are anymore.
Right. No, we definitely changed. I had a woman that I worked with many years ago, and I remembered walking into her office one day, and she was working as an advisor at a university, and she had a law degree up on her wall. And I was like, I was young, and I said, "Oh my gosh, so you're a lawyer?" And she said, "Well, no, I'm not." And I said, "Well, why aren't you a lawyer? You went to law school." And she said, "Well, I went to law school because my dad was a lawyer and he wanted me to go." And I said, "Well, gosh, law school, pretty much takes it out of you. That's a pretty tough run." And she goes, "Yeah, it was really difficult and really hard." And she said, "But when I got out, I really figured out I didn't want to be a lawyer." And I said, "Wow." And even in my own life, I think, I feel like I've led several lives. I think about the different chapters and the different experiences. And, the idea is that much like getting to know a good friend, you have to stop and listen. And you have to stop and care about that person. And for a lot of us, we're so busy trying to look this way and to have this social status and have this much money and to do all the right things. I'm an adult, I've got to buy a house, now I'm taking care of the kids. That it doesn't happen often until things just kind of quiet down and you're basically kind of sitting there with yourself and you ask yourself that question, which is, am I happy? Is this what I want to be? And sometimes we don't know the answer. Sometimes we don't like the answer. And a lot of people make movement and change. I've seen a lot of people one of my best friends had been in a very stressful account management, very successful for a company for years, but I could tell he was depressed. And he decided I remember the day he told me, and he said, I'm going to be a flight attendant. And I said, wow. I said, really? I'm like, and he made the decision. And now it's been probably about 7 years that he's been a flight attendant, but never happier.
Enjoys it every day.
Yeah, it really does. And I've a lot of people in life that, sometimes you change rather than for the money, you change the job for what you want to do and who you want to be. And I think as long as you open up that question and you allow yourself to have that dialogue with yourself, it may sometimes open up some interesting doors. And our most limited resource is time. And so, if you can see that and maybe make some adjustments, you make the most of the time that we do have.
And it's the cautionary tale of, I was watching this documentary or this series called Down to Earth. It's on Netflix, and they were in Sardinia, where it's a blue zone, and they have the most centurions per capita, people that lived over 100, and they live a very simple shepherd style, walk every day, family oriented, fresh foods, but they have a higher carbohydrate diet, a little protein, and fresh garden vegetables. But their carbohydrates are, fresh made bread and pastas and cheese from the goat. So that's all fantastically romanticized in my mind of moving to Sardinia. But it just runs sort of counter to this, the American fad trend of, this is what is next. I'm going to eat paleo. I'm going to eat keto. I'm going to go nothing. Carbs are the enemy. And so and people, I've thought this. We've talked about. There's a balance in things. Mm-hmm. There's a true balance of, just everything, really. It's not.
You're right. I mean, again, definitely a lot of the fads, but people spend their whole life dieting and then they die. I mean, it's amazing how, whether it's the plastic surgeon or it's the hot rod, for the middle-aged guy, or whatever it is we reach out for. And again, I've never really found anybody who's ever had a better marriage because they drank. And I never knew somebody who had so much money that they were completely happy. I never knew somebody who was ever loved too much by their friends and family. Again, but it's interesting how we really do spend our lives spinning our wheels so much, and then it just kind of ends.
And you said that your dad, Uncle Paul, I love your parents so much. They were very influential in my life as well, just their beingness. And obviously they created this beautiful being as well.
Mm-hmm.
They see how what were we talking about? family stuff all of a sudden.
Right.
But I let me chase another rabbit real quick. Those moments, the 4th of July moments at your house with our family. I remember your mother's cooking and her potato salad, and specifically, and this is when I'm young. These are nostalgic moments that you go, those are the ones to savor now.
It really is. It's important. It's
about it. It was just.
It is. It's been. I lost my mother 32 years ago. So when I was 17, and I think I was grateful for the childhood I had and the experience. But I think I learned early on with my mother's passing that life is very precious. And you mentioned and joked about being a minimalist. When I was a kid, our house burned down. You remember when that happened? Sorry, we had a fire in our house, and our house burned down. And then I think about my mother passing, and then our grandmother passed right after my mother, and all of these things. And it really does. I think it has helped to shape me in some ways. I'm very grateful for the things I've been given, but I don't expect that they have to last forever. So there's a part of me, I think, that I keep it simple. I spend time with the people I care about, and even though that's a very small group, I think we learn to find the things which are really going to be meaningful, and that's made a difference in my life. I'm by no means perfect and faced all kinds of challenges that we all do. But it's interesting how sometimes even those most difficult times in your life are sometimes instrumental in helping us to learn new ways to see life and to feel more fulfilled and to feel that sense of happiness. Regardless of, you could look back and say it was a tragedy, or you can look back and say, well, I've learned a lesson from it.
I know what it was now. It was Uncle Paul, your dad. He said, this is you quoting him, we're all forgotten in a generation.
Yes. My dad was a very spiritual but practical man, and he always talked about kind of the meaning of life, and I appreciated walking the journey as he got older. And that again was another experience that helped me. We're very close, and he always would say that you're forgotten after a generation, and that people really don't know you, and it just, the world keeps going forward. And but the meaning behind that is to make the most of what you have.
You hear a lot about people saying, I want to leave my footprint. Even this show is about having some sort of contribution to the world, which is different than, I think, trying to live up to a legacy status, right? I want to be a family legacy and I mean, that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself, right? Especially knowing, in light of what you just said, unless I put a plaque on, the Hollywood Walk of Fame, which your grandkids will walk over and it's like, oh, that was Granddad. Okay.
Right. Well, I always, as you're talking about that, I always thought about the analogy, which is like, it's always interesting when people, are like, oh, I've been reborn. I had another past life, and everyone was Cleopatra, but nobody was the handmaid. It's very interesting, and you always think about it. People do have this kind of sense of wanting to be, immortal and remembered, and all of these different things, and I guess I think of it in a little bit more existential sense, is that we all live on if we have given good to the world. There's an old saying that said, whenever you go to a building, there's a big plaque in the building, and it's built by, and here are the donors. And the saying always went that the most important donor is the one who is anonymous.
Yes.
Because they gave for the benefit of what that was, but for no personal recognition. And so theirs is actually the highest gift.
when you give in private, that's where your reward is in private, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's something that you is a great thing to think about in life, is that the good that you share, you know, the smile you give today, all of that, the love that you express towards people, that goes into this universe. And like the butterfly wings that, you know, creates the tsunami. I think that's a really meaningful way to look at life, rather than attributing something personal to us.
Yes, and those 4th of July picnics at your house, I mentioned the potato salad, but
Yes,
the one thing, and as you know, my mom passed away, Sarah Lee, 7 years ago now,
I know.
and both of those women, Aunt Sandy, my mom, their smiles are what I remember most.
Right, you do. They were like two peas in a pod. Both wonderful women that loved their families and really showed love. And again, I think that's a legacy both you and I have experienced. Is it's so great to be around those kinds of people
Yeah.
who love unconditionally, who share themselves, who want the best for everyone. And again, another lesson I think I've gotten in life is that idea of tell people that you care about them, treat people well, you know, be slow to anger, but throw out thank yous and I love yous all the time.
And set boundaries.
Yeah. Set boundaries and set expectations. Yes. Expect less, give more. Right.
Oh my God, Beau, thank you so much. Is there any way that anybody listening can find out more about FHE, about yourself and your practice? Is there a website they can go to learn more about you, to connect?
Yeah, they can always Google it. I have a website for my private practice, is improveyourmood.com. And that's always that's been up for 20 years. It's I always like to say it's rarely updated, but always permanent. And then FHEhealth.com is where I work here in South Florida for a treatment center, working with mental health and substance abuse issues.
Perfect. Beau, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam. It's a pleasure to be here.
Love you. Talk to you later.
Talk to you later. Bye.